Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to session 417 of Humanity Rising. I hope everybody had a good weekend. It was a beautiful time here in California. The weather was perfect. And I want to just greet everyone in the spirit of well-being and the rising sap of spring that even in the midst of summer, we can feel all around us. Today, we want to honor the 100th anniversary of the great German poet Maria Rilke. We began this commemoration a couple of weeks ago with Ludwig Max Fischer, a professor of German language and mythology and intercultural communication. And because it was 100 years ago, just around this time, that Rilke really channeled several of his greatest poems, so that we want to just honor that great poet. And then I thought, as we start this morning, I wanted to bring in a little Rilke poem, but one of his most famous, one that has spoken to me time and time again over my life and has inspired me in some of my darkest hours. And it's very short, and it goes like this. Time and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd. They move to broader laws. They carry strange customs with them and demand room for bold and audacious action. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. They change the world. Time and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd. They move to broader laws. They carry strange customs with them and demand room for bold and audacious action. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. They change the world. In that spirit, everyone, let's just pause, as we always do as we begin our sessions, and just center yourself in your body. Feel the ways that you move to broader laws. Think of the strange customs that you carry with you. Think of waking up as you attune yourself to your heart. And as we all listen to our heartbeats, let us just commune with one another, and let us honor the heretics and the mavericks, the innovators, those that go outside the box. They're the ones through whom this future speaks. They're the ones that change the world. Thank you, everyone. Now, in the spirit of Rilke's great poetry, far beyond the little one that I just recited, although it's been especially meaningful to me, we want to commemorate the grandeur of this poet with someone who, as I mentioned last time when I introduced Ludwig Max Fischer, is one of the great commentators on Rilke, along with Hermann Hesse. He's been on Humanity Rising before and done a course for Ubiquity on Hesse, the great German writer and also a poet of the 20th century. So Max, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you, and I'll circle back after your lecture is over. But welcome and thank you.
Hey, Jim, we lost Max. I'm sure he'll be back in a second. I'll let you know when he gets back in. He just dropped out for some reason.
Well, I will expound a little bit more on Rilke as we wait for Max. He had a few challenges with his Zoom as we were in the green room earlier. He's up on Victoria Island in British Columbia, actually. And so came in from a long way away. Let me just say a few more words about Rilke as we begin. It was 100 years ago that he channeled his two greatest poems, at least according to the scholars who know about these things, the Duino Elegies and the Orpheus sonnets. He was a man who was, for the first 4 years of his life, dressed as a little girl by his mother. And so he entered into the world with, I would say, gender fluidity, as we would call it today, and was very delicate as a personality, as an individual. He was acquainted with illness. He was also, as he evolved his life, he actually died at a very early age, and was never requited in his love. He had a number of love affairs, but they never seemed to come to the kind of fruition that he desired. One of his lovers was the great Salome, who you may remember from my comments on Friedrich Nietzsche. It was Nietzsche and Rilke and Freud and other great ones who all were the consorts of the ravishing Salome, Russian woman, intellectual, writer, poet, who held these great salons to which she attracted some of the greatest minds and luminaries in Europe at that time. At the late part of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century, where Nietzsche and Freud and Rilke lived. And she was a very famous Russian immigrant, lived in Paris, and Rilke was a devotee of hers. And I had asked Max last time what incident or what trauma Rilke had gone through before he channeled this writing. And I was asking it because that is what happened to Friedrich Nietzsche. 3 times he proposed to Salome, and 3 times she said no. And on the 3rd time, she actually left with a friend of his, because he and a man named Paul Ray and Salome were traveling around Europe together, and they were in their youth, they were in their 20s, and they wanted to build a utopian community. And in the course of their travels, some of which was with Nietzsche's sister, who was acting as a chaperone, he fell in love and proposed. And then she left with Paul Ray. And he was so desolate and so inconsolable that he went out to a obscure lake in northern Italy in a cabin, and there he was tending his wounds. And it was there one day, as he was taking a walk in the midst of his despair, that he channeled his greatest masterwork, Thus Sprach Zarathustra. And literally in 10 days, he channeled the first third of the work. And then several months later, the next third, and then the final third. And it was all out of his consternation of his psyche with unrequited love. And Rilke, his whole life, went through very many emotional ups and downs, and was such, like Nietzsche, very sensitive, I would say, tender souls, both of them, acquainted with illness, delicate of body, tender of soul and psyche, and as a result of which the muses flowed easily through them, and they became some of the greatest writers of their time that have endured to the present day. So that's what Ludwig is wanting to speak about, because that's part of his passion. And while we're speaking of these kinds of matters, I want to bring to all of our attention something that we would want to invite all of you to, that are in this spirit of deep mythopoetic search for meaning in one's life. And that is our course that's coming up in August in Chartres. Every year we travel, we make pilgrimage to Chartres in France. It's a little town west of Paris. You may have heard of Chartres Cathedral, which Joseph Campbell called the womb of the world. It's an architectural masterpiece that rivals the Taj Mahal, such as its beauty. And the cathedral was built in its final form 800 years ago on a site that the ancient Druids considered the most sacred site in all of Europe. And it was a site associated with the feminine. It's so interesting how the feminine has been a muse, not just to Nietzsche and Rilke, but to Goethe, to many, many mystics and poets. And in Chartres, when the Druids came there about 3,500 years ago, as part of the spiritual leadership of the Celtic tribes as they swept out of Central Europe into France and the Benelux countries and up into England and Wales and Ireland, down into Spain. And when they came to Chartres, they understood that there was a particular feminine quality there that was so compelling to them that they made that what they called their Vatican, their seat. And every year the Celts would gather from all over Europe in Chartres. And that's just another example of the mesmerizing, magnetic attraction of the feminine. And as you know from your reading of Carl Jung, it's the anima in both men and women. It's that feminine that is the gateway to the process of individuation, because the feminine that guides us and leads us into a encounter with our feminine, with our shadow side. So the fact that Rilke and Nietzsche would have these kinds of encounters, out of which come extraordinary creativity, is something that's also noted in actual places around the world, and with particular power in Chartres. And this year, as we're going to be making pilgrimage, if those of you want to put the dates on your calendar, it's the 13th to the 19th of August. It's going to be at a time of the full moon. It's going to be at a time when the Catholic Church celebrates the Feast of the Assumption, which Jung called the greatest doctrine in 2,000 years of Christian history, the doctrine articulated ex cathedra, 1952, by Pope Pius XII, that Mary ascended bodily into heaven as Mother of God. And that transposition of values, according to Jung, was the greatest achievement of the Christian religion, the assumption of Mary into heaven as Mother of God. So it's on August 15th that the church consecrates that. And in Chartres, they do something very special. There's a Black Madonna that is kept hidden all through the year. But on the Feast of the Assumption, she's brought out and paraded through the streets of Chartres, and then brought back into the cathedral and put right by the altar. And for the next 7 days, she's there in all her splendor. And people come from all over the world, and we're going to be very privileged to be there during that time. And we're going to be there with V, who many of you may know as Eve Ensler, the author of the Vagina Monologues, many plays, best-selling books, the latest of which is called The Apology. And so we're going to be going to Chartres in the spirit of the divine feminine, but also in the spirit of apology and reconciliation and healing. After 2 years of the pandemic and 2 years of isolation and lockdown and social distancing, and all the vicissitudes of fate that we've all endured, when we need to just get back out there and reconnect with our deepest humanity. So we're going to be doing that and creating a pilgrimage to Chartres. And the feminine will be very much with us. The ancient Chartrean masters, when they consecrated the third liberal art of rhetorica, which we'll be delving into, had it under the aegis of the planet and the goddess Venus, known by the Greeks as Aphrodite. So just imagine going to Chartres, honoring the Black Madonna, honoring the Great Mother, but also honoring that ancient goddess of love and sexuality and beauty, Venus, at the same time, so that the coming together of all these different energies, but also in the spirit of apology and reconciliation and healing. It's going to be, I think, a very powerful adoration of the feminine at the deepest levels, but also a very powerful opportunity for all of us to dedicate ourselves and to commune to the feminine, who at these times of duress is particularly close to humanity. You know, it's worth just mentioning historically that It was out of the Black Death. And the Black Death was a real pandemic. A quarter of the human population between Iceland and India was wiped out. It lasted for 60 years. Whole towns, even cities, were completely decimated. And it was during this time, for the first time in Christian history, that Mother Mary came close to the earth and really communed with people in the intimacy of their suffering. If you understand and know about church history in the first centuries after Christ, Mary was always depicted as the Queen of Heaven. She was regal, she was distant. But during the Black Death, she's just sort of descended from heaven and came close. And the expression Notre Dame, Our Lady, was coined during the Black Death. And in the aftermath of the Black Death, there was hundreds of cathedrals built all over Europe in the name of Notre Dame. And it was during this whole time that the Christmas became a major holiday, and the notion of Jesus in the manger, and with a stable, and with the humility, the humbleness of Jesus, rather than Christ the Pantocrator, the ruler of heaven and earth. All that happened as humanity went through a pandemic. And you can feel it again today, that as we go through all this duress all over the world, the feminine is the divinity, is a quality that is making itself felt. The Black Madonna in particular. So we're cognizant of these things, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring in Rilke on his 100th anniversary, is because we wanted to just consecrate the feminine in a particularly nuanced way during this time. So I'm not sure what's happened to our friend Ludwig, but he seems to not be able to get back in. So I'll see what we're getting in the chats. If anybody wants to say something about Rilke or the feminine, I want to welcome that today. Deanna Rice is asking, what is it about the topography that makes it so revered by the Druids? Well, that's a very good question. When the Druids came to Chartres, it was heavily wooded, but there was a hill. And at the top of the hill, there was a granite promontory just jutting out of limestone rock. It's a very rare combination of limestone, which is very porous, but granite, which is really hard. And between the granite rock promontory sticking up out of the hill and the limestone, they found a grotto. And when they entered the grotto, the Druids discerned a very powerful, energetic quality of the feminine. And it wasn't just a generic quality of the feminine, but the quality of a young virgin expecting impregnation. That was the quality that they discerned. And it was very, very specific. So around the grotto over time, they fashioned a Black Madonna. And on the fall equinox, they would take the Black Madonna out of the grotto and put it on top of the promontory. And then in the spring equinox, they would take her down into the grotto. And so that they had this 6-month rotation of the Black Madonna, but it was always honoring the feminine at that place with that understanding of the telluric energies. And you may know that the Druids were an extraordinarily clairvoyant, mystical group. They'd never built anything. They believed that nature itself was the temple. And they had a particular charism with nature. They had an attunement and an alignment with the trees. And they could speak to the trees in very powerful ways. And in fact, the major druid, which was usually a man, but could also be a woman, was called the voice. And they had the capacity, where they refined over time, of incarnations. And if you know anything about magic, you know that it's the capacity to say specific words in a specific way with a specific tonality that can open up the universe and create the capacity to shape-shift forms. And that's magic. And that's the magical incantations. You know, you think of Lord of the Rings when Gandalf was trying to lead them, and remember they came to the mountain of Moria, but he couldn't open the door because he couldn't read the inscriptions, and he tried different incantations that he knew, and nothing happened. And then it was Frodo that said, "Why don't you use the word friendship?" Remember? And then he said the word friendship, and the door opened. So there's a relationship between sound and frequency, and the capacity of a human being to articulate that with clarity that opens up matter and spirit into an ambiguity that allows the magician to shapeshift reality. And the Druids knew a lot about that. And they were particularly conversant with the oak tree and the sycamore tree and the elm tree and the willow tree. And the different trees have different frequencies. So it's not just simply enough to say the word. You have to understand the word that is called forth by whatever frequency you're seeking to effectuate. So,
Hey, Jim,
yeah,
we have Ludwig on the phone. He's having internet problems. So what we thought we'd try is Ludwig off of my phone and just see if you can hear him or not. And then we have a plan B if that doesn't work.
Cool.
So
well, thank you everybody for your forbearance. We'll try to bring Ludwig on now. Ludwig, are you able to hear me?
Yes. You know, actually, I heard a few words, I think, spoken by Jim about ancient traditions. I think it was a Celtic tradition about people speaking to trees and receiving answers from trees.
Good. Well, that means you can hear. So why don't you just carry on, Ludwig? People can hear you.
Okay, great. So I want to make reference right away, even though I only heard about 2 sentences of what Jim said, and that because it leads me straight into sonnet number part 1, first sonnet, and it actually starts tree, O pure transcendence, O Orpheus things, O tall tree in our ear. And everything remained silent. But even in the silence, there was a new beginning. There was a beginning, and there was an indication and towards transformation. And then in the second stanza, Rilke says that animals, out of their silence, they went forth from this now clear and liberated forest. They came forth from wherever they were hiding. And it turned out that they were not so quiet just out of being cunning and afraid, but they were so silent and so quiet because they were listening. And then screaming and roaring was that gesture towards life was very small, actually not audible in their hearts. And where there was so far not even any kind of building to receive where these animals would go from there, where they could hide again, and where they would have access to another world. There you, and that I think refers to Orpheus, you created temples in their ears. And so I actually, some time ago, I did a recording of this sonnet number 1. And I think what we are in a crisis today of deep listening, because we can hear nature. If we school our attention again in a way where our perception is so focused and our intention is purified from fear and desire to the degree that we are contacting that which speaks in nature, then that is all it takes. That is what Rilke's quintessential attempt is to do with his poetry. It is to make us, turn us again into deep listeners. Now that is, of course, an attitude towards all of life, and that includes not just the living, but the ones that we call the dead, which brings me to actually a subject of how Rilke relates and speaks about those who are, we call the dead. Now, again, what we need to learn in these crazy days is what indigenous cultures and our own ancestors are teaching us about the presence of our ancestors. You know, Carl Gustav Jung said nothing influences a person more than the unlived life of their parents. So that which was abrupted, that which was killed in both world wars and in other current wars, and we had in the last years, and all the killings, these are energies. And these are things that are with us and that influence and talk us and basically change what we consider as possible, what we consider impossible. So at one point, Rilke says, you know, the dead have to work too. They have to do work too. So this is Rilke's major concern, that in this deep listening, that we learn to listen to nature, but we only learn to listen to spirit again. And that is what happened in this February of 1922. And that's why we are commemorating today this enormous event that took place in that little Chateau Mizot, where he is alone in that French-speaking part of Switzerland. And it's something, these sonnets and these elegies, he started them in 1912. And then there's another category, another way of relating to his life, where we can learn a lot from him, is it took another 10 years where he knew that he was actually what I would call spiritually pregnant with the birth, with something that he carried in himself. And so this is this inward movement. I think that a lot of people in the West today are so drawn to as they adopt Eastern forms of meditations. But we have similar traditions actually in the prayer traditions of the West. So there is an inner intensity that is actually best cultivated through an enormous patience. I think at one point Franz Kafka says the only big sin that a human being can commit is impatience. And that is being carried along by all the distractions and all that energy in us that is simply aiming at fulfillment now. And so we are shortening time, and we're inventing all these different kinds of machines that give us faster and faster access to something that we want at the moment. Of course, we do not want it tomorrow because it wears out, whatever it is that we wanted yesterday, because it's fueled by an act of, well, I think Paul Virilio called it actually, it's a form of frenetic stagnation. It's a speed that is driving incessantly us towards something that should be happening much sooner than it is. So Rilke is spending under immense suffering. If you just think about 1912 between 1922, where he is and what he does. And he's actually at one point working in a war ministry in Vienna, and there's a crazy story that says that he had to work in the archives, and they got a huge amount of paper that were not lined. And here you have the greatest poet of all times. And he had, for weeks and weeks, he had to make lines so they could fill their statistics in the loggings. So there is something, there are words waiting for us. There are words in every person. But I think, particularly in our times, in these modern and post-modern times in the West, we are associating the poet's role in poetry sort of with nice words. There's sort of that aesthetic quality and cute rhymes, maybe. But that the role of the poet in traditional society, which is closely related to the bard, and you still have some of that in the Irish tradition. I'm thinking right now of the great storyteller, actually, Martin Shaw, or people like, again, Robert Bly, where the symbolic qualities of language are cultivated in these traditions. The metaphoric potential that could different connections between different words have, that a poet works so hard, so arduously to discover them, because it's like writing poetry is more like diving down in the ocean of words where the deep meanings are housed, and they don't give themselves to you very cheap and very easy. You have to work for them. You have to earn them, actually, these words. So poetry is an enormously hard work. So, and in the novel, the only novel that Rilke ever wrote, Martin Lauritz Brigge, is a pretty long passage that talks about what does it take to actually write a poem 10 good lines. I'm giving away the ending of here. What does it take to write 10 good lines? And so actually I'm going to play for a few minutes a recording that I did. And it is about 5 or 6 minutes. And since you don't see me today, which I'm actually not quite sure that is the greatest loss, because I don't know whether Rilke actually, his words would have become necessarily stronger through the visual, because I think the deep listening could be easily actually distracted by visual images. So I will play this for you. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, and you might want to go more sort of in a meditative mode and just hear what Rilke has to say about listening. And then out of this listening come those deeper words. And I think before I actually played it, I do want to say something about what makes words cheap in our times. And I think a lot of it has to do with what we believe in, what a word actually is, and that we take words away from their roots, and we take them in the command actually that the average person has of language, in their vocabulary, in their ability to form extended, longer sentences, longer thoughts, and then in the making that leap into the symbolic and metaphorical, which I would say it goes from the branches, this is how far the grammar can reach, but into the leaves and into the blossoms, which are the metaphors and the symbols that a poet engages and works very hard to extract, but not in an aggressive way, but much more in a way what I call a receptive attention and a receptive concentration on giving yourself to what you see, rather than the typical Western attitude, also that Western sciences, how much can I get out of it? So rather than how much can I get into it, until what happens then is a revealing from the other side, which is, of course, it's not the other side anymore, but it's actually becomes a co-presence. Anyway, but now let's see what Rilke has to say. Aber mit Pferden so wenig getan, when you write too early, wenn man sich einsteigt. Man sollte warten damit, und werde Sentenz finden, und Sinn und Süßigkeit damit, for a whole lifetime, ein ganzes Leben lang. Then a long one is possible, und ein langes womöglich, and then at the very end, und dann ganz zum Schluss, maybe you are able to write 10 good lines. Vielleicht könnte man dann 10 Zeilen schreiben, die gut sind. For poems are not, as people think, simply emotions. And Beeren sind nicht, wie die Leute meinen, Gefühle machen those early enough. Die hat man früh genug. They are experience. Es sind Erfahrungen. For the sake of the simple poem, you must see many things. Von meiner Seele will muss man viele stecken. Many people see. Menschen sehen.
Hey, Ludwig, this is Rick. It's garbled, so could you tell us what he's saying?
So, yeah, I think, Rilke is sending today at a frequency that is about 12 or 15 G, about 5 G. So this has never done that before, so except today. So I think what I will have to do is to quickly stop this and see that I do have this. The technology is not my friend, I should say. And so, but what he's saying here, what Rilke is saying here is that you have to give your soul, you have to give your heart, you have to give all of your ability to turn inward and to turn towards your attention towards what is actually happening in nature, because it is also happening then in you. So I think I will turn now to actually a sonnet that I'd like to share with you today, and that is the sonnet 121. And that is something we've been waiting for in the Northern Hemisphere for quite a while, and that is spring. And here's the poem, it's sonnet 121. Spring is here, has come again. The earth is like a child reciting many poems. Now she receives the reward of her long efforts, of her learning. Strict was her teacher. We loved the white in the old man's beard. Now we may ask for the poems of green and blue. She knows them all. Oh, earth, now that you are free and happy, play with the children. Oh, blissful earth, we want to find you. The most joyous one among us will lead the way. All the countless subjects the teacher taught the earth, everything that nature encoded in the depth of roots and into long entangled stalks, she transforms it all into song. Now I'm going to go through the last three lines with you in German. So all the countless subjects is, oh, was der Lehrer sie lehrte. Now you can see the repetition here of the A sound. Now this is a sound that resonates in the throat chakra. Das viele, the vowels, different vowels actually resonate in different parts of the body. Actually, if you want to know a little bit more about it, I did a podcast for Ubiquity on July 16th where I talk more about that. But then, it goes down with the vowels in the next line, and was gedruckt steht in Wurzeln. Now there we really go underground, don't we? Gedruckt. I mean, this is a word that is full of hard consonants. In Wurzeln, that is a word, it's similar in English, in roots. But then in schwierigen Stämmen, in difficult stems actually. So this is the energy that the plant puts into the stem, and that is the long and slow growing part. But that's the stability there. It's kind of like in our spine, that is the stem. We need to have a core, we need to have a culture actually that supports us and gives us and supplies to a certain degree meaning in our life. So the last four words are pure celebration. When she says the earth sings, she sings, she sings, she sings the songs. So what is happening in the spring? Well, it is the earth reciting many poems. Now, what kind of a relationship do we have here in this poem to the earth and to the plants? Now, this is what we need to change in our world at the moment. So, and I'm going to move actually right to the sonnet 112, and I'll give you here my translation. So, sonnet 112, if you find it, you want to look it up. Praise the Spirit who can bring us together. For we truly live in symbols. And the minute time fractions of our clocks move out of step beside the real rhythm of the day. Oh, I would like to say, let's spend a webinar with Ramon just on these 4 lines. Because this is, of course, about what Rilke talks about. What is our relation to time? This is another besides our relation to time, to nature. It's we have it totally organized, don't we? We have it to the milliseconds, to the nanoseconds. And usually we ran out of it. Well, why do we cut? You can't run out of it. You run into it maybe, but you run with it. Well, there is a meeting of the time and that which is eternal and is infinite in the symbols. That's actually what the word symbol means, symboline, which like in symphony, it's when the dimensions meet. That means the literal, the factual, and the ones that are non-material, but they're an integral part of who we are. So praise the Spirit who can bring us together. So what Rilke did with his life, it's a huge sacrifice actually, in order to, which brings him to a deep dedication, a deep devotion of something that he feels inside, that is an inner knowing that Spirit will talk to you. And that is actually what happened in that February of 1922. And maybe that is just as important for what is possible for our minds to be able to grasp, to think, to understand, to comprehend. And maybe that will outlast even some political events. You know, it was in 1922 when Mussolini took power in Italy. And that's the beginning of fascism as a political focus in the 20th century. So the way we write history is with this dramatic, violent events usually. What Rilke says in his first 4 lines, what really happens in our life is actually another rhythm. It is the reoccurring eternal rhythm that we have happening in nature, in the spring, for example, and in the seasons. So these are not historical events, but these are events that, if we tune into them, that allow us to tune into that essence of ourselves that also is again and again reuniting with the biological process through each birth and each biological depth that we are going through. Praise the Spirit. This is another word. The German word is Rumi. Actually, in this sonnet, he says, "Heil dem Geist." Well, that word "heil," that is another word that was said and quite horribly abused, but that means hail the Spirit, praise the Spirit, who can bring us together, for we truly live in symbols. And the minute time fractions of our clocks move out of step beside the real rhythm of the day, or the real rhythm of our month, of our different stages in life. We do not know the place where we belong, he says in the second stanza. We do not know the place where we belong. And yet, we act according to a true connection. Our senses reach out to receive, and through the empty distances arrives pure awareness. Our senses reach out. Now, Gerrymander calls television and electronic media sensory deprivation. So it's very important, as useful as the electronic media are, and as we're happy and wasted, we have to take an ecological approach here. So as soon as this program is over, I will go with my dog to the ocean and walk along the shore and look at the waves for a while until they start talking. So there is an ecology that is right now greatly in danger. Our senses reach out, and through the empty distances arrives pure awareness. It is only when even the intentional watching, observing, it is fading into an intention, a non-intentional, pure giving yourself to what is being received, a pure awareness that isn't filled with, what do I want from this? What do I want from this now? And how quickly can I get it? And then he says, oh, powerful music of the spheres. Now we continuously receive frequencies, which are actually, again, I talked about it in July 16th, the vowels are related to the orbits of the planets in the cosmos. Where does that sound originate? Powerful music of the spheres. Does your sound stay clear and pure? Because we remain absorbed in our daily doings. Even the farmer who works and worries never reach to where the seeds turn the season into summer. So the farmer and the person who is closest to those rhythms. Actually, I heard someone say that, different people that have a hard time when they go through that process. He says it's the farmers usually that are through their whole life go through the rhythms, the cycles of nature, that seem to have a less difficult time in that process. The farmer never reaches to where the seeds turn the season into summer. The earth bestows. Now the earth is a gift giver. Die Erde schenkt, it says in German. Die Erde schenkt. The earth is a gift giver. And how can we actually respond to that earth? Well, I would say, speaking here with my friend David Steiner Russ, that we can enter that with gratefulness for the gift, and telling her always to give more and more and more in quantity, while we actually are losing a lot of the quality in that which those gifts and fruit and vegetables and all these nourishments that we see from the earth. And if you read this book, by the way, a great book, Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer, well, that is actually there's a lot of Rilke in that book. So, an awareness and action, obedience to what is happening. And it is that we, in a deep way, we have the choice of either listening to spirit and nature or crash like Icarus. I think we are in the times right now where Icarus rules. And that is what the ancient Greeks called hubris. That is, we think we can control this world that we live in and our experience here through chemical and through technological manipulation, and we can control the word and control language, and actually lose a lot of meaning because it's through poetry. We depend a lot on poetry to actually regenerate meaning in language. So when Viktor Frankl talks about man's search for meaning, man's search for meaning, that I think it is a lot related to the strength of our main instrument, a major instrument towards generating meaning. So we're looking for the meaningful word, and we are actually to enter a meaningful world. And we actually are bombarded with meaningless words. Right now, we have the age of misinformation and disinformation and fake news and fake words and words that are actually in the special interests of deception for all kinds of purposes, except for finding that strong language. Think about when we say, what is strong language? Well, it's 7 words you can say on TV. It's actually the words that are still strong, like the F word and the N word and so on. They still have emotional charge, but a person like love, it's now trademarked, right? It's I'm loving it. Well, I'm not loving it. What it takes to charge these words again with deep meaning when you say them. So there's an enormous amount of abuse at this moment going on with language. So praising, I found this here, a quote of Viktor Frankl, actually quoting Rilke. For the first time in my life, I was able to understand the meaning of the words. This is what happens in great poetry if you really go into we know elegies, if you go into the sonnet surface and take your time to really let them grow with them, then suddenly words will speak to you that you sort of went. They were floating by, you were floating by them because you didn't dive deep enough. So, Viktor Frankl, for the first time in my life, I was able to understand the meaning of the words. The angels are lost in perpetual contemplation of an infinite glory. What happens is when we reach stages of consciousness that move beyond, while still being grounded actually in the consciousness also of the earth, then there is dimensions of meaningfulness offer themselves to us. So the major destroyers of the meaningful words are, of course, the advertisement that actually, imagination is a very, very sacred space. So if your imagination, that means the association that you're able to make are basically reduced and bonded, actually imprisoned to a particular desire that is evoked, so you buy a certain product, then you lose a lot of that freedom that is actually part of your ability to create meaning through language. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the ecological manipulated language. And this is just like thick layers which the poet has to dig. It's dig deeper and deeper until he says, no, this is nityak. This is still a connection, a set of string of words that are commonplace in a way where they have worn out because words were out. And then, of course, we have this quantified masses of unverifiable, pseudo words. This is what I call the dastrophe, which is actually a catastrophe. It's changed the C to a D, where we quantify masses of words into statistics in percentages. So this is the hard work that a poet needs to do in order to refresh the language that otherwise is used or abused a word out. I see that this illusion of counter time is still moving and on. So I think I'm gonna, at this point, just give you a love poem. And it is, I give it to you first, actually, in the line-by-line translation, German and English, so you get a little bit of the flavor of the German. Wie soll ich meine Seele halten? How can I hold my soul? Dass sie nicht an deine rührt. So it won't unfold into yours. Wie soll ich sie hinheben? How can I lift it over you? Über dich zu anderen Dingen. To reach for other gifts. Ach, gerne möchte ich sie bei irgendwas Verlorenem. I'd love to hide my soul among all that which has been lost. Im Dunkeln unterbringen, an einer fremden stille Stelle, die nicht weiter schwingt, wenn deine Tiefen schwingen. To hide it in the dark, in a most distant silent space, which could resist to resonate when your heart deeply sings and sweets. Doch alles, was uns anrührt, yet everything that reaches us, dich und mich, reaches you and me, nimmt uns zusammen, joins us together, wie ein Bogenstrich, like a gliding bow. There are zwei Seiten, which draws one voice, eine Stimme zieht, from two separate strings, draws one voice from two separate strings. We're running into a problem here with English language, which is so linear, where you can hold back the verb for such a long time in German. So you have to sort of, you have to swim or float or dance with the sentence for a while until the conclusion will reaches you, but you can't do that in English. So it's extremely hard. Auf welches Instrument sind wir gespannt? And what kind of instrument are we attached? Und welcher Geiger hat uns in der Hand? And what musician holds us in his hands? O süßes Lied, O song of love, so sweet, so sweet. So this is the search for meaning. I think it's connected to the musician is, to who actually, how do we play our instrument, our language instrument, our violins, in order to, so the two strings, the two tones that are on different frequency actually become one voice. This is, of course, the whole longing, the deep longing that we have as human beings towards an experience of belonging. Well, so I think that what about we have a look at maybe some people who would like to say something. I have this hope that maybe there is somebody listening today who has actually Rilke by heart in German, maybe even or in English, or an experience that where Rilke some alchemical life and had some significance that you would like to bring to our attention, give us the gift of that. But before that, I just, because I'm now in a whole pile of notes, but I just will give you two more short 4 lines of quotes from Rilke before we do that. But in the meantime, you might get ready to see what poem you might give us. So these are these 4 lines. Yeah. Going down towards God is hard. But look, you're struggling in vain to fill your cup. And suddenly, to be a child, a girl, a woman, is enough to satisfy the infinite. Going down towards God is hard. But look, you're struggling in vain to fill your cup. And suddenly, to be a child, a girl, a woman, is enough to satisfy the infinite. And the second 4 lines that I want to give you as my last lines I want to give you today from Rilke. God is the water. You just form a chalice pure and pour with 2 dedicated hands. If you kneel, then too, God will give you, will fulfill you beyond imagination. God is the water. You just form a chalice pure and pour with 2 dedicated hands. If you kneel, then too, God will give you, will fulfill you beyond imagination. Yeah. So, what do we have from participants at this point? There's someone? That would like to?
I'm taking a look at the chat there, Ludwig. I don't see anybody. Here, Jim's back on again.
Hi, Ludwig. Thank you so much. It's been a bit challenging to hear everything that you've been saying, but I think most people got the gist of it and have been expressing their appreciation. I'd like to ask just a question or two in the time that we have remaining. One is, I was struck by your comment that you can find words in every person. And I just wanted to have you expand on that, because that is such an interesting notion. Because, you know, we think of people having emotions and people having moods and people having various currents of energy coursing through them. But the notion that people have words is also a very interesting and intriguing notion. And I would just love to have you say more about that.
That people have words. You mean that the language that we use is actually a physical, an emotional?
Yeah, you had made the comment at the beginning of your words. You said that there are words in every person, and I was just struck by that notion because you know, the poets, you know, are like fountainheads for words. And anyway, I just was struck by that. I hadn't really thought about that much before.
Right. So I feel that there is a core of messages that every person has and takes with them, and they are partially cultural, they are partially inherited from the ancestors. and there is a capacity of expression. So I'm there basically with the linguists that feel that we're not born tabula rasa, but I'm more with Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, that there is in us a personal and a collective grammar. That means a code. And we're longing to fully express it during our lifetime. But then, and it is still much more intact in the approach to the language, the spontaneous language in children, but later on we sort of drum it out in an educational attempt to make a person conform to particular values of a particular society. But that inner temple of listening is filled with a primary sound, and that takes shape in messages that are given to us through spirit and are given to us through our direct interaction with nature. So, and letting that core, letting that essence speak is, I think, a key for a person to have the opportunity and cultivate the opportunity to live a meaningful life.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ludwig, for that. And I think this might be a good time to bring the session to a close. So I want to thank you for your perseverance in getting to us even by phone, even though we couldn't make Zoom work today. So I appreciate it. And it's been very good over 2 sessions now to have you with us to commemorate the great poet Rainer Maria Rilke on the 100th anniversary of his greatest poems. So Ludwig, thank you so much. And everyone, I want to just welcome everyone for the after chat session. Stan just put the link in the chat box, and we will probably have Ludwig back another time when the Zoom is working a little bit more efficiently. And in the meantime, I want to wish you all the best for this coming week, and we'll see you all again tomorrow, same time, same station here on Humanity Rising. Tomorrow, we're going to begin with the interview with Vladimir Posner on the situation with Ukraine, which is very much up in the news worldwide. In many ways, as Ludwig is pointing out, it's a war of words and the manipulation of words. So we have to be careful what we see on the news and what we hear, whether it's actually true or not. But we're going to seek to bring some illumination, at least briefly, to the situation in Ukraine by talking with someone who knows very deeply the history and what is taking place. So that'll be tomorrow as we begin Humanity Rising. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ludwig. We'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same station here on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much.